Hey, so how are the wife and kids? Yeah, they doing all right? I know you've been stuck with me a lot lately, but I'll be honest with you, I'm glad it's you. I've seen a lot of good things in you lately, brother. Been doing awesome, and I just hope you know I care about you, and I'm glad you're with me. I got a water for you, just in case you get thirsty. Just don't drink it too fast, all right? It's gonna be about 25, 30 minutes here. Can't take a break, so hang tight, and hey, church, how are we doing? Good. Well, I'm glad you're with me today. Glad you're with us. Yeah, I'll introduce this guy in a little bit. Don't worry about him. We are in a 12-week study of Paul's letter to the Philippians. It's known as the joy letter. So this is all kinds of encouragement and excitement in this, even though he's writing this letter in chains, which I'll talk about today. Now, at the center of this letter is this incredible verse about Jesus. So the whole letter really kind of centers around this called the hymn of Christ. And what we've done is we believe that this verse, this image of Jesus, needs to be tucked in the heart of everybody at our church. So we've made these magnets up, and as part of this church, okay, I'm asking for everybody to grab a magnet and memorize this and commit it to memory. We don't ask a ton of this from you, but this is so powerful, especially as we step into what I think is going to be a wild political season. We already know there's so much division in this world. This is the idea of Christ humbling himself and how to live from the heart of Jesus Christ. And I want this tucked in everybody's heart, because as we study this incredible letter, we're going to see that everything kind of revolves around the hymn of Christ, including what we're going to talk about today, about a mindset that Jesus Christ has. So I want to ask you to grab one of these. If you didn't grab one already, on the way out, we'll have them there. We'll have those LIFEST tickets, the easiest evangelism tool in the world. Just give somebody a free ticket to see an awesome show. So I want everybody to grab one of those. And then if you want to go deeper, we got a reading plan. We always try to give you more tools than you might need, but we want you to go deeper into the Word. Because we at Christ the Rock, I'll tell you, we got a heart for you to really take seriously being a disciple of Jesus. I want you to take on the mindset of Christ. And today we're going to talk about a specific aspect of the humble mindset of Christ. We're going to talk about a gospel-forward mindset. I want to talk to you about what that is and why I think you should have one, okay? So a gospel-forward mindset, as part of the mindset of Christ here, is a mindset that's just open to how God might use every circumstance and situation in your life to point people to Jesus. And so before we dig into the text, I want to explain why I think you should have this. Why should you care? Why would you need to bother having a gospel-forward mindset? Well, if you're a follower of Jesus, you know the gospel, right? You've given your life to it. So you then there are an ambassador for the gospel. All of us have been called to share the gospel with the world around us. And the gospel, if you don't know, is it's the greatest news in the history of the world, right? And the gospel, this is Webster. Now, Webster was a Christian, but this is one of my favorite definitions of it. The gospel is the message concerning Christ, the kingdom of God, and salvation. So if you're a follower, you have the privilege of being an ambassador for the gospel. Your life is meant to serve a much higher and greater purpose than just living for yourself. And so at Christ the Rock, we get this very idea, our very mission from Jesus. So he said our job is to share the gospel and make disciples, and that comes right from him. So one of the last things he said with his life before he ascended to heaven was he got his disciples together and he said this. He said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. He said, I'll never leave you, and I've given you this mission. Now go out. And our mission at Christ the Rock is taken right from the Great Commission. And so our mission is to go make disciples who make disciples. And the vision that fuels that mission is that when you walk through that door, it's in two parts. When you walk through that door, we have a vision for your life personally. And we believe that we want you to become the person God created you to be. And the way that we're going to help you do that is be a disciple of Jesus, to actually obey and listen to everything he said. A successful life is defined by us as a church, and biblically is to just obey Jesus. That's a successful life. So we're going to try to teach you how to do that. And then the second part of our vision is that we want to saturate the Fox Valley with so many disciple makers that it can't help but transform our city and bring revival to it. I mean, if God's people are serious about following Jesus, the community should look different from that. That's what we believe. And we want to raise you up so that you go back out into the world and change our community. And if you're going to partner with us as a church, what we ask you to do is live something called the intentional life. Now, Ben mentioned it, but the intentional life is really about how you use your time. So we talk about 4 ways. We got up there, God time. Every day, church, we ask you, in the Word and in prayer, a minimum of 15 minutes. You're not going to grow just by listening to a few sermons. You got to You know this. Got to grow yourself. So God time every day, gather time. We want you to be part of a local church. Now, we love that you're here. If this isn't for you, I'll tell you about 10 other great churches you can be a part of. But be a part of a body of believers. That's part of growing. Then we got group time, be in a group consistently. We call them discipleship groups here. That's how we grow. And the last one is go time. We don't talk a ton about this, but go time, we don't talk enough about it. Go time is really about living on mission, to proclaim and demonstrate with your life the gospel. So we use our words and we use our life and the way we act to point people to Jesus. And so today's about go time. We're going to talk about a gospel mindset. You still good?
I'm still good.
Okay, a gospel forward mindset is what we're going to talk about today. And again, that is being open to how Jesus might use every circumstance and situation in your life to advance the gospel. And we're going to see Paul today. He's going to demonstrate this for us. So listen to what he has to say. Gospel forward mindset. Here's what he's talking about early. Now we're in verse 12 through 18. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. So he's saying this is a good thing. As a result, it has become clear, this is the result of it, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. So these chains are doing good things. And then he goes on to say, it's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. Now listen to this. But what does it matter? What does it matter? He asked this question. The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. There's always a gospel mindset in action. So let me give you a little backstory on Paul and why he's talking like this, okay? About 2 or 3 years before this, Paul was arrested in Jerusalem because he's trying to get people to follow Jesus. So he's out there preaching the gospel. They arrest him. They send him to this place called Caesarea. That's where I picked up this guy. And at Caesarea, what we ended up doing is he's sitting there for 2 years, beautiful city, but he's like, nothing's happening. So he appeals to Caesar. They put him on a boat and say, fine, you can go appeal to Caesar. He's a political prisoner, high-profile case. And then he gets in a shipwreck. You can read about this in Acts, one of the great maritime stories of all time of antiquity. Great story if you ever want to check it out. And he survives the shipwreck, finally gets into port in Rome, and he rents a house, and that's kind of where we pick it up. He's sitting in chains with all of them. And when he gets there, everybody's kind of ragging on him. He's got a high-profile case. He's got all these opponents, combative circumstances. And yet Paul says, I rejoice because the gospel's getting preached. So he's got this great attitude. So in this passage, again, he's going to demonstrate a gospel-forward mindset in 2 ways. And I think we can learn from both of them. The first way is that he leverages his difficult circumstances for the gospel. And the second thing he does is he keeps the main thing. He doesn't get distracted. And the main thing is the gospel. So let's dig into each of these. So let's look how he leverages his circumstances for the gospel. This is what he says. He writes to the church. Now he's writing back to the church because he's been in chains for a while. And he tells them, here's what's going on. He says, now, I want you to know, you church in Philippi, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. Like, this is a good thing. So instead of complaining about his circumstances, he goes, you know what? These have actually helped my ministry. These chains, good thing. And there's 2 things that he says happens because the chains were on him. One is about who he's reaching, and the other is about who he's encouraging. So it's really interesting, his perspective on this. So let's look at the first one. Let's talk about who he's reaching. Verse 13 says, as a result, it has become clear throughout the entire palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Okay? Now, the Greek word for the palace guard, and you know this, he's one of them. Now, that's a proper noun for the Praetorian Guard of the emperor. These are the elite soldiers of the Roman Empire. Augustus instituted this about 100 years before this, and all the Praetorian Guard guards the emperor, and they're kind of concentrated in Rome. That's how we know that Paul's in Rome. That's one of the clues that we know he's there. Well, these are like the Navy SEALs of, these are bad men. You want to show them? You want to give them a little flex? I mean, no joke. I mean, the idea is like, so you got to understand that Paul's not sitting in some dingy prison cell. So at the end of Acts, it says he actually rents a house. And then because it's high profile, they give him the Praetorian Guard. So in like shifts every 6 hours, a new guard comes in and ends up getting chained to Paul. Well, Paul looks at this and he goes, well, wait a minute here. I can't run. I'm not gonna get away from this guy. I don't even know why they have chains with Paul, right? I mean, this guy, I'm not getting anywhere. But then Paul realizes too, like, wait, he can't get anywhere either, right? Like, remember this? You couldn't go anywhere. So I'm like, hey, Paul starts thinking, now I got an opportunity to share the gospel because I got a captive audience 4 times a day, 6 hours a day. They got to listen to everything I say. So Paul starts going, wait a minute, let me tell you about the gospel. How about that? And then he ends up discipling them, loving on them, finding out about their family. And that's what Paul does. And then what happens is then these guards go back to their barracks or wherever, and they tell them about Jesus. And then all the guards after a while end up hearing the gospel. This crazy guy, Paul, who they get strapped to with these chains, and they tell him about Jesus. And over time, they get discipled and start kind of ministering in there. And then we find out that those same guards, because they're the Praetorian Guard. So in Philippians 4, it talks about Paul's actually saying, I'm reaching into Caesar's household. Because these guys are going into Caesar's household and they're preaching the gospel to them and they're doing all this incredible work. And so if Paul didn't realize that my chains opened up an opportunity for me to reach the upper echelon of Roman society, he would have completely missed the opportunity. So he's saying to the church, look, don't be sad for me because the gospel's advancing in crazy ways, right? Like you've been out there sharing the gospel with all these other people. I mean, this guy's been discipled and now he's going back into his barracks doing incredible work. My chains have served to advance the gospel. He leveraged this for the kingdom. It never would have happened had he not seen that this circumstance was actually something God could use. Isn't that incredible? Now his shift is over. I'm going to let him go here. Can we give it up for our guards? Jamie Zweers going to unlock himself. Now, again, imagine now, he's leaving me. I'm going to get another guard here, in theory, but he's going to go back now. I'm going to bring in that brother. Come on. Proud of him. Now, he's going back there to preach the gospel to his brothers in the barracks. Say hi to wife and kids for me. Now that's Jamie Zweers in our body, real-life power lifter, I'm just going to say, like world class here. And he does sit up front when he's here, and he says, Joe, if anybody messes with you, I got your back. So just telling you, just saying, you don't want to mess with any of us up front here. So anyway, Paul leverages his change. It's brilliant what he does. And so the first thing he does, a gospel-forward mindset, leverages circumstances for the gospel. But there's another way that he encourages everybody. He says, another good thing happened because of my chains. So verse 14 says, and because of my chains, most of my brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. And so others in the church see that he's out there being really bold. So if he's in chains and he's preaching the gospel and he's getting away with it, they're like, hey, I can do this too. If he can do that in his chains, then why couldn't I? And that's how courage works, right? Courage begets courage. You know, you don't teach somebody courage and tell them what it's like. You show them, and Paul's showing them. And we need more people showing courage in the church today. And let me tell you a story about, I've been encouraged by a young gospel-forward thinker who's 22 years old, part of our church. His name is Jonah. He's in my discipleship group, actually. And he texted me one day. I was out of town. He's like, Joel, I got this idea. I got to talk to you. I said, what is it? He goes, I want to see revival happen. He goes to Lawrence. He says, I want to see revival happen at Lawrence. I go, oh, that sounds awesome. What are you going to do? So he says, Joel, I'm a senior. I'm graduating. He was a captain on the baseball team. It's a good baseball team, too. These guys are good. And he said, I feel like I got to share the gospel with these few remaining bits of time that I have on campus. And I said, yeah, go for it, man. What are you going to do? He says, well, I've never been baptized, so I want to be baptized and I want to preach the gospel. I said, all right. And he says, I'm going to make a flyer. I'm going to hand them out all over campus. So he makes this flyer, and he starts distributing it all around Lawrence University and hanging it up and just inviting people to come out, being bold in the gospel. And I'm thinking, if you don't Lawrence isn't always maybe a little on the liberal side of things over there. Some of you chuckle, you know what I'm saying, right? Not real open to the gospel all the time over there at Lawrence. But he's like, I don't care. I'm going to hand these out. It's a beautiful Friday night. Go down to the river, and we show up, and 50 people show up. Some of our crossing folks show up. It was awesome. Came out, and that's our young adult ministry. And so he set it up for 3 people to share the gospel. 3 people to share their testimony, the gospel through their testimony. And then we worshiped, and people are just walking by like, what are these people doing? Just right on this beautiful trail across the river. And then Jonah gets up, and he shares the gospel with everybody. Clearly, powerfully, passionately. And then he says, all right, it's time to get baptized. So if you haven't accepted Jesus and you want to get baptized, let's go. And he walks us across the street there's a boat landing there down by Law Street. And he gets in, and I had the privilege of baptizing Jonah in the Fox River. And it was awesome. It was really cool. It was really cool. And then he comes out of the water, and he says to everybody, again, there's like 50 people gathered around, if you want to get baptized or accept Jesus today, now's the time. Come on into the waters. And everyone's kind of like, oh man, should I? And then some lady gets up and she starts sharing her testimony spontaneously and pointing people to Jesus. And says, let's go. Anybody wants to get in the waters? Well, five ladies from Lawrence step forward and say, I want to do this. And Jonah's like, Joel, come help me. I'm like, no, brother, you got this. You're the one who started this. And so there's Jonah, like, oh, what am I going to do? But I'm like, hey, here's how you do this. And he baptized all those ladies in the river, and everybody came out of the water cheering, and the gospel was advanced on that Friday night 3 weeks ago. Woo! Let's go. Now, Jonah encouraged me, like if a guy like that can go to a place like Lawrence and hand out flyers among his peers, I can share the gospel more boldly. You can share the gospel more boldly. Courage begets courage. And that's what Paul's doing in this letter. He's saying, look, I'm being courageous and the rest of the church is coming along with me and the gospel's going forward. Okay? Let me make this personal for you, okay? What are your chains? What are the things in your life that you can leverage and be courageous with for the advancement of the gospel? Okay, now some of you you're chained to some dead-end job or some difficult people at work or your parents' difficult kids at home maybe or difficult marriage or maybe you've got a serious illness. You know, maybe you're dealing with your past and you're chained to your past and the regret of what has happened in your life or your story or they don't always have to be bad either. Jonah leveraged his graduating from college. It's wise and smart of him to do that. But, you know, a lot of times when it comes to our chains, God actually uses the hard things in our life to advance the gospel. You talk to many of you saints out there, you've seen how God uses your story and your difficult circumstances. A lot of times our ministry comes out of those places, doesn't it? Comes out of our chains. And so what I want you to wrestle with today is there something in your life? Is there a way that God can leverage your chains for the advancement of the gospel? And I want to tell you about a story that inspired me recently of a young man who did this. An acquaintance of mine, somebody I work with at the Y, I volunteer some of my time there. She's one of the executive leaders, leads one of our branches here in town. Her son, she told us, we pray every month as a Y team. And she said, my son got diagnosed with cancer recently. And it was a really rare, aggressive form of cancer. And so they almost had to shut their lives down to try to help their son through this. He's 26 years old. And the doctors couldn't figure it out, couldn't stop it. And so he went into hospice. And his funeral, he passed away, was Thursday. And in hospice, he realized that he had an opportunity to make sure people understood something about Jesus. So he said to everybody in his family, he made sure everybody knew, I love Jesus, and I'm looking forward to what God has in store for me in the future. So he's kind of telling his family about his situation. And he'd say things to his family. And it's so hard to watch a young person die. I mean, as some of you have had to go through that. And he says to his family, this is what I heard. He said, don't be bitter, be better. Don't be angry at God. And so the last moments of his life, he's ministering to his family. And he'd actually get him in and he'd pray over his own family as he's in the last days of his life, praying for peace over them as they process. They know he knows they're going to struggle, but he's thinking of them. His chains obviously were the cancer. Did he like those chains? No. Did he want them? No. But he leveraged those chains for the advancement of the gospel. And here we have this young man on the end of his life advancing the gospel with his family, preaching Jesus. That guy's an inspiration to me, and we need more things like that if we're going to advance the gospel forward. And that's what Paul is saying. Like, what can we do to leverage our situation and our chains to encourage others and to advance the gospel? You have things in your life that God can use to advance the gospel. What would those be, and what would that look like? See, Paul's challenging us today to go, hey, let's be open-handed to that. Let's be creative and let's be courageous because the gospel needs to get out. Now, that's only one thing. He does one other thing here too, though. So he leverages these chains, this crazy circumstance, but the next thing he does to demonstrate a gospel-forward mindset is he always keeps the main thing the main thing. He always keeps the main thing the main thing. You know, Stephen Covey came up with this. Got a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, really helpful book. And one of his lines in there is he says, in life, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Right? It makes sense. You go, oh yeah, okay. And the idea is, so the most productive, useful, impactful things in life, give that your best attention. Well, what's the main thing for a Christian? It's the gospel. We get distracted so easily as Christians from the gospel. It's hard for us to keep the main thing the main thing. Now, Paul's tempted to be distracted in this situation. Let me give you a little backstory here. So he rolls up, he's in chains, high-profile case, pops into Rome. The church already exists, and they see Paul, and they see him getting all this attention. He's preaching the gospel, and there's a lot of envy and rivalry, and they don't like it. And I hate to say it, but there's always, in ministry, there's a lot of ego that goes into it, and it gets ugly sometimes. I wish that wasn't the case, but let's just be honest, it does at times, and it gets hard for churches and people to work together. And some of the people are like, hey, this is great. Some are fighting against Paul, and he's got a decision to make. Do I clap back at the haters, or do I stay focused on the gospel? Listen to what he does. Here's the scripture again at 15. He says, it's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others are doing it out of goodwill. So we got both sides here. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am here for the defense of the gospel. In other words, we're working together. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. And then he asks the question, but what does it matter? What does it really matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. So instead of clapping back at the haters, he keeps focused on the gospel. The main thing stays the main thing, and the main thing is the advancement of the gospel. So what do we learn from this example? Okay, now I've been Christian a long time, and I see how easily we get distracted. Right? It gets to be political time. We're watching too much news, and then we get some political idea, and that's all we start talking about. It's really easy for us to forget that we're supposed to be advancing the gospel forward. You know, and where I see Christians really get hung up a lot is in the essentials, non-essentials debate. You know what I mean? Like there's certain things in Christian doctrine that are a little more important than other ones. And so let me explain what I mean by these. The foundational beliefs of Christianity is where the gospels exist. And so the idea is that you want to stay focused on the main things, the most important ideas of the Christian faith, because that's where the hope is, right? I mean, that's where the truth is. That's where we want to give most of our attention. And there's this quote given to Augustine. He's 4th century. It's a long time ago, because the church has always struggled to stay focused on the main thing. And he says, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, love. And so what he's trying to say is, we got to be together on the main things. We got to wrestle together in some level of love with the things we don't agree with, but let's try to do this with a lot of liberty and love. Okay, now, what I've noticed is a lot of Christians put a lot of energy into arguing about the non-essentials. A whole lot of it, and this has been to the detriment of the gospel. Now, let me give you an illustration to give you an idea of what are the essentials, what are not the essentials. So there's 3 tiers here. Now, this is called theological triage. This is an idea from Dr. Albert Mohler. And the idea is triage means sort by order of importance. And so there's certain Christian doctrines that are more important than others. There just are, okay? And we could put these in some sort of order. Now, at the top, these are the most important. This is Christian orthodoxy. This is a base level thing. This is what our statement of faith is based upon. So these are the issues that if you deny one of these, it's hard to call yourself a Christian because these are so core to what we believe. It's our worldview comes from this. So these are things like full deity and actual humanity of Christ, the Trinity, justification by faith alone, the authority of the Scriptures. Okay, our church and most churches put marriages between a man and a woman here. It's only been recently that we've kind of tried to drop that into a second-tier arguable category, but most churches throughout history just see that as an orthodox reality. Okay, second-tier issues. Right, we need a lot of love and liberty in these because these are ones where the Bible isn't as clear all the time, and sometimes we wrestle with these. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of church splits happen. And we have 45,000 different denominations. I don't know if you knew that. And that kind of breaks my heart because that means there's a lot of disunity. Some of the issues here, ecclesiology, that's how the church is run and governed. Baptism, not whether we should have it, but how. And the Lord's Supper, how do we practice that? Gender roles in the church. Huge topic right now in the church is what should women be doing in the church? Each church seems to have a different thing on this. The Bible's, you can make cases for a lot of different things with women. At Christ the Rock, just so you know, we have women in leadership. We have women pastors. We don't have women elders. Some think we should, some think we shouldn't. We have a lot of different perspectives on that. That's not an issue that, though, we want to be split over, okay? We can disagree. We can still follow orthodoxy and move forward, okay? They're important issues, for sure, but we shouldn't split over them, and yet we do. And then we have third-tier issues, and you can see some of these here. These are like, we got a lot of liberty, a lot of grace, a lot of perspectives on this. First one, millennial views. Those of us older generations, you know how opinionated millennials are. We get sick of hearing their perspective. I'm kidding, millennials. That's a joke. That's a joke. That's not what that means. We love you, millennials. Just lightening it up a little here. No, millennial views are about when Christ is going to come back, post, pre-millennial, things like that. Bible's not crystal clear. Freedom issues, can you drink alcohol or not? People wrestle with that. This is also like, how should we dress, worship style? Some of you want us to do hymns more. Some of you just want us to do more rock and roll. Some of you like this or don't. There's like not 100% agreement on these issues. So what we seek is essentials in unity, and non-essentials liberty, and in all things love. Now, what I've noticed is the church spends a lot of time arguing about second and third tier issues. So those issues get us all sidetracked to the detriment of the gospel. Now, the gospel is not contained in second and third tier issues, okay? When we present the gospel, it's always at the top. So when we talk from this pulpit about what we're going to share, I'm going to preach mostly about first tier issues because that's where our worldview comes, that's where the hope is, that's where the gospel is. Imagine if I rolled up on you and said, let's talk about the gospel. And I explained to you the merits of full immersion baptism. You'd look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you talking about, right? And then the church, the world looks even crazier at us when we talk about third tier issues, right? Let me give you an idea just for levity of some of the third tier issues. There are real fights from churches that happen, okay? There's one fight came up from a church when they realized that their worship pastor's beard was getting a little long. So they had to call a meeting to make sure, just talk about the appropriate length of worship leader beards. That was a real fight. Now, luckily, our Mark is clean shaven. He didn't hide that handsome face. Now, Pastor Ben lets it get a little unruly. I don't want to hear about it, I'll be honest. Now, he rocks a beard. If that gets long, just leave him be, all right? You don't have to have a fight about that issue. Another issue, this is a real fight in the church. Can you have cran grape juice? It's got to be just grape juice for communion. For real, that's a fight. Now, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what's in that cup that you drank today, all right? There might be cran in there. I don't know. Don't come talking to me. I don't care. Not an issue. All I know is nobody's getting sick and it gets the job done. So, doesn't taste awesome. I agree. I get it. I don't know what that stuff is in there, but I think it's grape derivative. One more issue. This one I couldn't believe. There's a real fight in a church over allowing deviled eggs at the potluck. Oh, those deviled eggs, and this one went to the elders. And the elders had an argument about this one, and they found a compromise. They said, okay, if you let deviled eggs, if that's balanced out with angel food cake, it's okay. Are you kidding me? Come on, church, what are we doing here? Real fights. Now, I don't know if the elders actually did that, but I mean, come on. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we get into. Now, I'm having a little fun with this, but when we argue about second and third tier issues, we get off mission pretty quickly. I realize second tier issues, there's a lot of them that are very important. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss them. I just don't think they should cause so much disunity. But they do, and it breaks my heart. Because you know what happens? The world looks at us bickering over these things, and they go, what is wrong with you people? What is your message? What are you about? Like, they just think you're crazy. They don't even hear the gospel through our fighting over these things. They go, what is wrong with you? Tell me the truth. Tell me about Jesus. Don't tell me about all these side issues. They see us fighting all the time. And what's even worse than that is as we bicker, we miss opportunities to share the gospel. Okay? Now, I just saw this come up the other day. I heard about this on the Holy Post podcast. They were talking about something called death cafes. You ever hear about a death cafe? What a great idea. Death cafes are where people can just come, drink coffee, and talk about death. Now, it sounds morbid, but the truth is we need to talk about death, I guess they sneak a little wine in there too, but it's a hard subject. So at a death cafe, I thought, what a brilliant idea. And I looked it up. Sure enough, 19,000 death cafes over the last 12 years, helping almost 200,000 people. I thought, what a platform for the gospel, right? Like, I hope this is, I want to know the church that did this. Well, you know what? It's not a church. Somebody else came up with this. And I thought, what a missed opportunity. Because I don't think the church is taking advantage of these, but wow, why not? See, sometimes I think we're so busy bickering over issues that we lose sight of opportunities to share the gospel. I go, what are we doing? We're missing opportunities, and we've got to get out there and be a little more serious about what God's calling us to. I think we need to a little more often ask the question Paul asks in the scripture when we start to argue and we start to think our issue is so important. You remember the question? Verse 15, he says, but what does it matter? What does it, sometimes just stop and go, hold on a minute. Does this really matter? Because he says the important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of that I rejoice. Well, Paul kept the main thing. He wasn't going to get deterred. He doesn't want us to get deterred The main thing is the gospel. And I think in the church we need more gospel unity right now. We got to be more unified around this, right? I mean, we got to talk more about what we have in common and not what we don't have in common. Church, come on. And let me tell you why this is so important. We have a very lost and hurting world out there. And you know this. There's so many people looking for hope, looking for something to grasp onto right now. And we have the hope of the world. We have the gospel. We know this. And here's what I think too. Christ is coming again soon. And we don't have a whole lot of time left. And there's 6 billion people who don't know Jesus. 6 billion people. We don't have time to sit back and argue details. We need to get serious about getting out into the world with the hope of the gospel. And so what I want to ask you to do today, I want you to ask this question. What can you do to adopt a gospel-forward mindset? What can you do to help advance the gospel forward? Because the world needs to hear it, and you know it. So let me ask you a couple of questions to wrestle with. What are your chains? Can you ask God, what are the chains that I have, and is there a way I could leverage that? Is God actually calling me to use my situation, my work, my life, whatever I'm kind of chained to advance the gospel? Would you just ask him what that might look like? And if not your chains, would you just honestly look at your heart and go, have I lost sight of the gospel? Have I become a little obsessed with my political perspectives or a secondary or third kind of tier issue? And I've lost sight of what's really important here. I'm not actually sharing the gospel. I'm just arguing a lot with people. Ask God to reveal that in your heart. And lastly, I just want to ask you, can we as a church look for ways to be more unified? Let's talk well of each other as different churches. Let's look for ways to work together. Because you know one thing I know for sure is that we're not reaching this community for Jesus. We're not going to saturate the Fox Valley with disciple makers if we're not working with other churches. You know the heart of Jesus before he died, what his one prayer was? We have really the prayer of Jesus, the big prayers in John 17. It's called the high priestly prayer. You know what his main focus in that was? It was about unity in the church. And we need more of that. We need more people preaching the gospel. And so as a close today, I want to read this as a benediction over our church. This is his prayer, and then I'll pray for us. But listen to what he says here. This is what he prays. He says, my prayer, he's talking to his Father. My prayer is not for them alone. I also pray for those who will believe in me through their message, which is us. That's all of us. He says that all of them might be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, Lord. May they also be in us so that the world may know that you have sent me. Father, I ask in the name of Jesus that you help us to see the priority of the gospel, that we keep the main thing, and that we're willing to let you leverage anything in our life to advance the gospel forward. Help us stay focused on what you've called us to do. Help us see the urgency in the world of lost people, so many, and you may be back any day, Lord. So use our lives to preach the greatest news that's ever been preached. Put a passion in our heart, Lord, to help save the lost and help bring hope and freedom to people who don't have it, Lord. And so we ask you to anoint us and to commission us to go, Lord, each one of us who calls ourselves a follower of Jesus. We ask this in his precious name. And Lord, and God's people said, amen. All right, church, thank you for that. Now, as you go today, I want you to grab a magnet and memorize this. Put it in your heart. Grab a reading plan, but more than that, grab some LifeFest tickets and give them to your neighbors. Easiest outreach thing ever. If you want prayer, come forward. You want to connect, go to the link. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Love you, church. We'll see you soon. Take care.